Greetings of the evening to Professor Prashant Sinha, our esteemed speaker for the day, Professor Sanjay Mukherjee, equally esteemed Professor Mehta, dear teachers, alumni, research scholars, students, ladies and gentlemen. I, Parth Joshi, take this opportunity to welcome you to the 9th lecture of Professor Avadhesh Kumar Singh Memorial Lecture Series organized by the Alumni Association of Department of English and Comparative Literary Studies, Saurashtra University. It is indeed my honor and privilege to be welcoming and introducing Professor Prashant Sinha, one of the senior most and leading living scholars in India in our discipline today. Sinha sir, as his bio note in the flyer reflects, has a long and illustrative career spanning over more than 3.5 decades in teaching and research in English, with erudition at par both in British and American literatures. Having taught at prestigious colleges and universities of India, Sir retired in 2004 after having served at Pune University for more than 26 years. Retired, but not the least tired, I should say, because he has continued teaching at several postgraduate centers in and outside Pune even after that. He has, to his credit, 8 published books, more than 35 research articles, several UGC visiting fellowships, and membership of UGC committees on English and the curriculum development. However, what really matters more to us, the students and alumni of the Department of English at Saurashtra University, is the fact that Professor Mehta, the senior most teacher at the department and a father figure for us, was a student of Sinha sir at Pune University. And in that sense, Sinha sir happens to be a grand teacher and a father figure who has always bestowed this department with fatherly affection, guidance, and care. Sir, you might not remember, but this is not the first time I'm having an opportunity to introduce you. The first time that I had this privilege was when I was a student of MA, and the department organized Shakespeare Worldwide in 2017, when Sinha sir was our plenary speaker, and which is where I saw for the first time these two great minds, Professor Ak Singh and Professor Sinha, meeting for the first time. And the interesting short incident is that I had misplaced the sir's bio note somewhere, and I went into the head's chamber calling for Professor Mehta because he had the bio note. And Mehta sir said that Professor Sinha is right here, you can ask him to give you his introduction. And I was awestruck how to approach sir and ask his bio note just before the event began. But Sinha sir very, very humbly and very affectionately sat with me for over 10-15 minutes and made me jot down his achievements in a very, very humble manner. So this is one memory I would cherish, sir. And we as paper presenters have seen Sinha sir attending the sessions and taking down notes from each and every paper reading that takes place. So that shows sir's erudition combined with his utmost humbleness. Sir is not only an avid and regular listener of the AK Singh Memorial Lectures, but he also meticulously takes down notes and supplies his valuable remarks at the end of the session. The topic of his talk today is Industrialization and Ecology, It All Ends in Smoke, where he is going to focus on 2 novels, Dickens's Hard Times and Elizabeth Gaskell's North and South, to show how mankind can balance development with ecology. We once again welcome you, sir. The session is yours. I would like to request the participants to kindly put off your audio and video for better audibility and visibility. Thank you. The session is yours, sir.
Thank you, Parth, for a very articulate and a very generous introduction. I hope it's not too undeserved.
Never, sir.
Before I proceed further, I would like to say a few things about my associations with Professor Ak Singh. It's sad indeed that he is not here. I have known Professor Ak Singh for a very long time. I had the good fortune to interact with him on numerous occasions in varied activities and situations. I went a number of times to Rajkot to deliver lectures, to take part in seminars, or as a UGC visiting fellow. He was always a very caring host. We also met at Delhi, Baroda, and Pune for academic assignments. He was so hardworking that whenever he came to Pune, he spent all his evenings working on his academic projects, never went out shopping or sightseeing. He did that only once when Mrs. Kiran Singh joined him. I want to mention one incident. We were there for a paper sitting, and that was a state level meeting with a number of people from outside the state of Maharashtra joining in. Thanks to endless debate, we could not finish our work on the last day. People had left. Only 3 of us were left there. Professor Rajnath from Allahabad, Professor Ak Singh, and me. We were working in the seminar hall of English department, a hall that people like Professor Mehta and even Professor Mukherjee know really well. At a certain time, the lights went off. It was raining hard outside. We began working in candlelight. It was all the donkey's work that was left. We finished around 10 o'clock. All the guest house dining halls were closed. What to do? Then I had a very old Fiat car, my first car, that often had to be pushed. And in that rain, it certainly had to be pushed. Dr. Singh and Dr. Rajnath both came in with me with some pushing of the car. When we reached the takeaway food place, actually the opposite of that, we had only one umbrella. Dr. Singh insisted that since he was the baby of the group, he didn't use that word, it's my word, he alone would go. So he took my somewhat holy umbrella and went all the way across the road to the eating place, brought the food back, and he was dripping wet. That's an example of Dr. Singh's sincerity and concern for the others. It's good that the series is interdisciplinary, because Dr. Singh was not only interdisciplinary, but also multidisciplinary. Before I take the plunge, I would like to thank a few people. First of all, Dr. Varsha Ghate, who has been my, shall I say, cyber angel. She fished for the pictures that I plan to show and forwarded them all to Dr. Dhwani Vaishnav. Dhwani, who has been the angel in the office of the association, first exhorted me to join the meetings in the series and then invited me to deliver this talk. In fact, she made all the necessary arrangements, including giving me a trial run in which Dr. Mukherjee and 3 of her friends joined me. I think I better get down to business. My full topic finally is from the agrarian to the industrial and the rural to the urban. Its impact on the condition of the poor and ecology, all ending in the smoke. A major development in the history of the world is the transition from the agrarian to the industrial and to the rural to the urban society. The process, which was first begun in the early 19th century in England, left in its wake many problems, and it visibly affected ecology. Now that India itself is trying to go through a similar stage of development, we should look carefully at what transpired then and what lesson we can learn from it. Although I'll ground my study in the historical events, my major focus will be on how literature, especially the mid-19th century fiction, has reflected this change and critiqued it. In the first half of the 19th century in England, the pioneer in the shift from agriculture to manufacture and trading, in fact, then it was called the workshop of the world. The process radically transformed the face of the country. To take a cursory look at what happened, by 1851, about 4 million people were employed in trade, manufacture, and mining, compared to only 1.5 million in agriculture. The population of Manchester, the hub of industry, had risen from 75,000 to 202,000 from 1801 to 1831. And by 1851, it had increased to 303,000, that's 303,000. It had become totally polluted. The river and the river banks of the city were unbelievably filthy. There were vast amounts of human, animal, and industrial excrement. The destruction of the occupation of hand workers, for example, handloom weavers, by steam power had greatly inflated unemployment. Frederick Ingalls, who was the Manchester agent of his father's business interest in England, in his book, The Condition of the Working Class in England, 1845, went beyond the external impact of the process and said that mechanical repetition meant loss of human consciousness, feeling, and purposiveness. He also denounced the practice of calling factory workers mere hands. As Davis records in the Oxford History of English Literature, the very body of a worker began to change. Charlie Chaplin's film, Modern Times, shows much later the same kind of alienation, the one that Karl Marx mentioned as a result of monotony and lack of creativity. Railway lines were laid around this time, and the sense of space was radically altered, and now workers could move from place to place in search of new job. The Chartist movement was a result of the deplorable condition of the working class. At another level, John Stuart Mill, as a utilitarian thinker, now talked of the economic man. Malthus said that the population of the earth multiplied in geometric ratio, even as resources increase only in arithmetic ratio. There was no harmony between man and the planet. Poverty and suffering were natural. The ideas of Malthus and the concept of the struggle for existence and the survival of the fittest, a term coined by Herbert Spencer, led to social Darwinism, as advocated by Sumner and practiced by Carnegie and Rockefeller in America. It even justified colonial imperialism. I think we'll have the first set of pictures now. Dhwani, please.
Yes, sir.
First three pictures, the so-called general pictures. You see, these are pictures of England during the industry, the industrial hub, as it were. I presume they all deal with Manchester and the area around it, like Preston and so on. The second. Here you can see the workers in the large, huge hall without really having much of their own individuality. The third one. The third picture, please. And this is another picture of the smoke, the grime, and the dirt that characterized the large industrial cities and their workshops and factories. Thank you, Dhwani. To get back to Dr. Mukherjee's favorite poet, William Wordsworth, in England, romantic poets like William Wordsworth had invariably preoccupied themselves with ecology. In poem after poem, he talks of the beauty of nature in the countryside. One celebrated poem about the ecology of the city, composed upon Westminster Bridge, describes the beauty of the city and the river when London hasn't started throbbing with its multifarious activities. To repeat the famous lines in which he described the beauty of London on the morning of September 3, 1802. Earth has not anything to show more fair. He says the city now doth like a garment wear, the beauty of the morning, and he appreciates the city all bright and glittering in the morning in the smokeless air. It's significant that although London was not an industrial city, what spoiled its beauty was the smoke coming from its innumerable chimneys. Just a few years earlier, Blake had written in his poem, London, how the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls. Dorothy Wordsworth, in an account of the visit to the bridge, pertinently mentions that the houses were not overhung by the clouds of the smoke. The sun shone so brightly with such a pure light. In fact, in the poem, the city is bare because it is not covered with smoke or vapor. 2 centuries after the publication of the poem, the Globe commissioned many poets to write sonnets on the bridge. And out of the 37 pieces that were published, several observed the River Thames next to London was filthy and foul-smelling. Sean Borrowdale refers to flows of blackened stream. Paul Farley writes, this smell is a balk to anything the eyes can register. He said that near the bridge, all the night soil of Westminster meets with the flood tide. Peter Oswald talks of the city's boil of poisons and seepage released from cinemas and prisons. If this is how poets described after 2 centuries London, which is not an industrial city, simply as a result of urban proliferation, how do writers look at what was happening in industrial towns in which smoke and filth dominated the cityscape? I use this word because there was virtually no landscape. Charles Dickens, though basically preoccupied with London, does cross the border and show what was happening as a result of the socio-economic changes brought about by the shift to a new phase in human history. In a broad sense, he was concerned with ecology from the beginning till almost the end of his career. As it were, he retained his love for the idyllic countryside in the small town of Kent in southern England almost all his life. In contrast, urban ghettos were always ugly and despicable places. Oliver Twist, one of his earliest novels, has pictures of dirt, filth, and grime everywhere, both in London and in the provinces where Oliver grows up. Even the police court in Bow Street in London is full of dirt and scum. The place where Nancy lives is filthy and disgusting. Dickens describes in chapter 50 the filthiest, the strangest, the most extraordinary of the many localities that are hidden in town, and mentions loathsome indications of filth, rot, and garbage. It is offensive sights and it smells from the narrow alleys. The houses have rooms so small, so filthy, so confined that the air would seem too tainted even for the dirt and the squalor which they shelter. They also have dirt-besmeared walls. Paris, another great metropolis, is seen to be no better. In A Tale of Two Cities, when Dickens shows Paris of 1775, it depicts the street in Saint-Antoine as one without any drainage and mentions its darkness, cold, dirt, ignorance, sickness, and want. It talks of mud, water, darkness, and a stinking little black courtyard, which is gloomy and full of foul nest, heap of refuse, mass of decomposition, a stark, dark shaft of dirt and poison, and spoiled and sickly vapors. Hard Times, the great Dickens novel of industrialization and urbanization, depicts more than these works about the capital cities, the unbelievable pollution that characterized a proliferating industrial town like Manchester. He had visited factories in Manchester in 1839 and was appalled by the environment in which the workers toiled. His Coke Town of 1854 is based on Manchester and Preston, another industrial town. Though smaller in size, Coke Town is a city of smoke and ashes. It has interminable serpents of smoke. The canal is black, and there's a river that ran purple with it, with ill-smelling dye. Chapter 10 describes the working part of Coke Town, that ugly citadel with its killing airs and gases. The chimneys were built in stunted and crooked shapes. In the next chapter, pale morning showed monstrous serpents of smoke trailing themselves over Coke Town. One could observe that the steam from the escape pipe, the litter of barrels and cold old iron, the shining heaps of coals, the ashes everywhere were shrouded in a veil of mist and rain. In the second book, Coke Town is seen as the blood of soot and smoke. The place was full of heavy vapor. The whole town seemed to be frying in oil. The river is black and thick with dye, and it is vile smells. It's an ill-smelling river that was dyed black. The workers live in houses on narrow streets. When called by Bounderby to help him against the striking workers, Stephen Blackpool tells his employer, "I'm converting his dialect into the kind of English that we all can understand. Look how we live and where we live. and in what numbers, and by what chances, and with what sameness. And look how the mills always are going, and how they never work as no near to any distant object, excepting always death. He says that owners treat them like machines, without loves and likes, without memories and inclinations, without souls to vary and souls to hope. This totally negates Bounderby's view that the workers want to eat venizons with golden spoons. Much later in the third book, when Rachel and Sissy go out in search of Stephen, Dickens draws a dismal picture of the pollution in the city and its surroundings. Coke Town casts ashes not only on its own head, but on the neighborhoods too. People cannot get a draught of pure air here. The green landscape is blotted here and there with heaps of coal, though it was green elsewhere. Once they traversed some distance, it was green, and there were trees, larks, pleasant scents, and a bright blue sky. From there, Coketown showed as a black mist in contrast to fresh grass and beautiful shadows of branches. There were hedgerows, and next to them, old pits in which many workers had died. A shocking event from the past is hinted at. Rachel's little sister had died of sickly air. Thus, the premier industrial town is heavily polluted and a total contrast to the picturesque countryside that is fast vanishing. Hard Times are rightly appreciated as one of the most trenchant attacks on industrialization. George Bernard Shaw called it a novel of passionate revolt against the whole industrial order of the modern world. Shall we have now the pictures on Dickens?
Yes, sir.
Dhani, please. You can see here the filth in and around the city. Here is another filth near the canal and the river, and all the dirt there. Seen clearly from Hard Times, which shows the smoke and the chimneys and all the rubbish that is heaped everywhere. Here is a view of, shall I say, the Riverside Road. Once again, shabby, dirty, ill-kept, and foul smelling. Of course, we can't smell the thing here, and I think we should be grateful for not being able to smell it here. Dhoni, I think I left out one picture from the general group. Okay, we'll get back to it. The last general picture, number 4. Yeah, this also is a picture of the lives of the ordinary people, the workers and their families. See how they are all scattered here without proper habitation, without any proper shelter and so on. Now let's get back to the last Dickens picture. This is from the end of Hard Times, near the end. Stephen Blackpool has fallen down the pit. They bring him up. He is dying, and Rachel and he are having the last conversation. A moving scene. Let's not forget that Dickens could be very sentimental. He combined that with a fine sense of humor and a comedy that was sometimes even cheap comedy, but effective. Raymond Williams, in Culture and Society, praised Elizabeth Gaskell's Mary Barton and North and South as instances of industrial novels, whereas Mary Barton looks at the problems of the industrial society mainly from the socio-economic angle. North and South also directly brings in ecology in a fairly prominent way. In Mary Barton, A Tale of Manchester Life, the author very early complains about the poverty and hardship of the employees, which is contrasted with the wealth and luxury of the employers. The events in the novel include a fire in Carson's mills and a long description of how two men are caught in the fire. The workers of the mill suffer dire poverty after the fire, as then they receive no wages. Other mills also slow down and finally stop all work, thus rendering the workers really destitute. Thus, after describing the real filth on the streets, she depicts the utter poverty and stark indigence of the Davenports. Among the families of the workers, there are many deaths, all caused by diseases and malnutrition. In the middle, however, the attention shifts to the murder of Harry Carson by a union leader and the arrest and trial of the wrong person. The ecological issues are left behind, the solution to the problems of poverty and unsavory condition, both at the workplace and at the homes of the workers, is a rather contrived Gandhian one of fostering love between the mill owners and workers. Ironically, I am referring to the Gandhian solution on the 2nd of October. I guess as a wife of a clergyman, the author had to think of a way out in the Christian framework. It was felt by some critics that Mary Barton was a pro-worker novel, and North and South was an attempt to redress the balance by showing the manufacturers in a good light. Perhaps this conclusion about both the novels is exaggerated, but lest we get diverted from our main issue, I move on to the concerns in North and South. As Margaret Hale goes from London to her father's rural parsonage, the writer gives us vivid picturesque descriptions of nature. Equally wonderful descriptions are scattered in chapter 6, in which they bid farewell to the village or the manufacturing town of Milton, probably modeled after Manchester. The first thing that strikes a family about the new place once they move to it is the smoke and fog of this town, quite a contrast to rural Hellstone. In 1844, an Act for the Good Government of Manchester provided that every furnace in any mill shall be constructed so as to consume the smoke arising from such furnace. Nevertheless, the family encounters the reality of the smoke. Mrs. Hale also complains against the dirt here. Bessie, a worker's daughter, tells Margaret that she acquired a terminal respiratory disease while working in a cotton mill. This disease, characterized by difficulty in breathing, affected many cording room operators, who once afflicted by it became asthmatic and short-lived. She was like many other girls in her teens, working in unsavory conditions when this happened. At Thornton's dinner, Margaret talks of the sufferings of the poor and injustice to them in the industrial north. But he, though conceding that at one time manufacturers inhumanly exploited the workers, says that now the two classes are evenly balanced in the conflict. This is clearly far from the truth. He is totally opposed to the idea of the parliament regulating the factories. During other visits, the mother of the manufacturer condemns all the mill workers who want to strike for higher wages. Her son, John Thornton, does the same simply because he feels it's all a question of who is able to vanquish the other in the struggle for survival. The masters are the hands, as he, like all the other mill owners, calls his workers. He supports despotism and protecting the interests of the masters. The mill owners want to reduce the wages so that they can retain their own margin of profit, while competing in the consumer market with the newly rising American and European manufacturers. Bessie, however, when talking later to Margaret, counters the argument by pointing out that the money spent on Thornton's grand dinner was spent on potatoes and meals would keep many children of workers from starving and crying. The union says, Bessie informs Margaret, the masters have made a lot of profit over the years. They can now take the cut in profit caused by the competition. The violent and righteous strike by the workers, protesting against the arrival of Irish replacements for them, is put down firmly. In other words, it fails. Mrs. Hale herself becomes more and more of a suffering invalid in the new environment. Soon she is mortally sick. She even says, I should not be ill dying if he had not taken me away from Hellstone to this unhealthy, smoky, sunless place. Even her son Frederick, when he comes secretly to visit her, feels that it was a blunder to leave Hellstone that has caused Mrs. Hale's sickness. Mrs. Shaw, her sister, corroborates her nephew's views later, when she wonders for what a place her brother-in-law had exchanged the lovely Hellstone home. She finds Milton noisy, smoky, dirty, without taste. This novel, like Mary Barton, takes a different turn after the middle, when Thornton becomes sympathetic to workers, loses much of his own money due to upheavals of the market, and finally succeeds in his love for Margaret, now rich, marrying her at the end. Shall we have the remaining pictures? Dhoni? This here is from Mary Barton. Mary is talking to her father. Her father was the actual killer, and that was not revealed till the very end. And it was her fiancé who was accused. So here is a man broken down, failed as a union leader, and given to drugs. And she finally meets her father and shows sympathy for him. The next picture, please. This picture is from North and South. Shows all the workers streaming in and crowding around the factories. Look at the huge chimneys which are there. We'll proceed now. Thus, in these two novels of Mrs. Gaskell, the solution is Christian love and not social reform, which resulted from multiple novels of Dickens. Dickens never got over the shame, the humiliation, and the hardship of working in a blacking factory when he was not even a teenager. It come from small town south of England, who always despised the dirt and the grime and the filth of the slums of London, the city in which he finally lived and worked. Even in the novels I've not analyzed, such as David Copperfield, he repeatedly draws vivid pictures of the unsavory conditions in the great city. As we saw, the poor quarters of the pre-revolutionary Paris are equally filthy and grimy and foul-smelling. He was the most popular novelist in the English-speaking world, hailed everywhere, rightly so, as a great champion of the poor and the downtrodden, an eminent public figure. I guess it's not very well known that Queen Victoria tried to write a novel. She sent the novel to Charles Dickens, and there she wrote, from the humblest writer in Her Majesty's kingdom to its greatest novelist. I suppose that shows how highly Dickens was esteemed even by the eminent public figures. In contrast, Elizabeth Gaskell was a modest housewife and mother, married a Unitarian minister who encouraged her to write fiction. She knew the real poor second-hand only in a capacity as a helpmeet of her husband, and not as someone who had to struggle with poverty in early life. Her husband, moreover, belonged not to the mainstream Church of England, but a radical sect in Christianity. As someone grew up away from the agrarian south of England, she did not have the same contempt for the industrial north. She wrote the first biography of Charlotte Bronte and was perhaps inspired by the depiction, the Luddite riots and the Chartist movement in Shirley. Charles Dickens was staunchly opposed to utilitarianism and industrial culture. He has some exaggeration, but Dickens was known as a master of caricature, who would draw larger-than-life pictures to impress his point forcefully. Mrs. Gaskell is, on the other hand, a practitioner of what is often called domestic realism, and focused on the travail of families more than their struggles in the outside world. Her main departure from strict realism lies in conveniently killing people to highlight the plight of those who are suffering from want, malnutrition, lack of medical care, and filthy surroundings in areas without adequate sanitation. She is not opposed to industries, but just wants better working and living conditions and minimum necessities of life for workers and their families. In spite of the differences, both Dickens and Mrs. Gaskell show the filth, the pollution, and the intolerable conditions in which the poor live and work in order to survive. They also remain firmly opposed to the exploitation of the poor by the manufacturers and merchants. The entire concept of social Darwinism is anathema to them. It's noteworthy that the canonical novelists who followed these two, such as George Eliot, George Meredith, Thomas Hardy, and Joseph Conrad, did not get back to this theme. In fact, they mostly set the novels in provincial England or in the countryside. D.H. Lawrence was the first great novelist who came back to our concerns, and that was about half a century later. What happened during this period that brought about this change? Let's consider socio-economic developments during this period. In 1867, the Second Reform Act started the process of the challenge to the tremendous power that the trading and manufacturing middle class, the so-called bourgeois, had acquired after the passage of the first Reform Bill in 1832 and the repeal of the Corn Laws in 1846, which effectively put an end to the domination of the landed aristocracy and gentry. Although the opponents of the monopoly of power enjoyed by the middle class of traders, manufacturers, merchants, and financiers had managed to pass in 1843 the Factory Act limiting the women and children under 18 to a 12-hour working day, the hours were still much longer than desirable. Even the 10-Hour Act, which came in 1847, limiting this period to 10 hours, was very high by modern standards. Now, after 1867, thanks to the radical Tories like Disraeli, the opponents of the unscrupulous capitalists and businessmen were in a position to challenge them by effecting reforms in the manufacturing unit. Trade Union Act, legalizing trade unions, was passed in 1871. Factory Act came in 1874, effecting further reforms in the manufacturing unit. In the 1884, the Parliament passed the Third Reform Act, which virtually enfranchised all the adult males, thereby providing foothold for workers to press for their rights. The Fabian Society, which was a kind of social democratic party, was formed. Thinkers like William Morris now tried to make the labors of the workers more creative. Thus, the working place and the living conditions of the workers were made more tolerable. In Sons and Lovers, D.H. Lawrence takes a backward glance at what mechanized coal mining has done to the environment. As he writes, the bottom succeeded to hell row. Around 60 years ago, that is, in 1850s, a sudden change took place. The gin pits were elbowed aside by the large mines and the financiers. The coal and iron field of Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire was discovered. Soon there were 6 pits working. Nevertheless, the actual conditions of living in the bottoms were quite unsavory because people must live in the kitchen, and kitchens opened on the nasty alley of ash pit. So Lawrence, looking back, corroborates the view that the new industry created filthy and unhealthy living conditions. The great challenge to the industrial supremacy of Great Britain came from Germany and the United States of America, both of which emerged as its chief competitors. The new Germany was the Prussian-dominated, politically unified Germany of Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor as he was called. The old culture of Goethe and Weimar was now superseded by the dominant military-industrial complex. Since for me there falls a shadow between the great literature of Goethe and the late romantics of the pre-industrial Germany and the modernist writings of Franz Kafka, I'd avoid rushing in the angels who fear to tread, just not being well read in German writing of the second half of the 19th century. I will, however, take a cursory view of the process in America. The new nation had the advantage of possessing unlimited space and therefore spreading out when industries came. The America of Henry David Thoreau is a green, picturesque America. There is idyllic countryside in which he could lead his life as a naturalist. Railway lines were being laid down, but near the Walden Pond he could savor the beauty and tranquility of nature. His journeys down the rivers also were in the midst of wilderness which had not yet been spoiled by human agency. Writing in 1884, Mark Twain viewed in the Huckleberry Finn the regions around the Mississippi River as rural and spread out. This, of course, was in 1830s and 40s. The industries came in a big way after the Civil War. The triumph of the North meant that the way of life of the trading and manufacturing middle class was going to dominate the nation, in which the southern feudal agrarian way would be eased out. The massive expansion of the industries ushered in what is pejoratively called the Gilded Age. The business corporations dominated the economy and wielded unfettered power till Teddy Roosevelt, during his presidency, curbed them. Upton Sinclair's novel, The Jungle, 1906, vividly shows the horrible working and living conditions of the meatpacking workers of Chicago. The book is usually a prescribed text in American history courses, and so we can realize how authentic the account was. Now, what lessons do we learn from the above in India? Railways came in 1850s itself. Some industries were set up during the next 100 years. For example, Tata Iron and Steel Company, the textile factories at Ahmedabad, and the leather industry at Kanpur. There are lots of factories at Bombay as well. In 1930s, when Munshin Premchand went to Bollywood, then it was simply Bombay, and tried to write a script for a movie called Mazdoor, in which he showed the labor problems, the movie was banned and not allowed to be screened. So obviously mill owners in the Western India were quite powerful. However, when we attained independence, we were very heavily agricultural in our 7 lakh villages. State of affairs could not continue and cannot remain so in future. Our population, which was 37 crores at the time of independence, has multiplied to almost 135 crores. But the area under cultivation has only decreased rather than increased. So industries have to be set up, but where have we gone wrong? In certain sectors, such as defense production, agro industries, roads, canals, public transport, housing, and many others, I cannot make an exhaustive list. There is an urgent need for greater productivity, but they have to be set up only with due caution. I remember for more than 2 decades, my father worked with the Rohtas Industries at a small place called Dalmia Nagar in Bihar, and one of their plants in the complex was a cement factory. When the wind blew in a certain direction, cement would fall from the chimneys not only on the open fields and roads, but even inside the courtyards in the houses. There are blasts everywhere, every few days in chemical factories. The Bhopal gas tragedy killed, maimed, and infected tens of thousands of people. Can this state of affairs continue? Can our metropolitan cities, which are bursting at the seams, bear the burden of multitudes of migrant workers, the migrating mazdoors, as it were? When thinking of options, let's keep this in mind, that manpower is our greatest asset, and we cannot go for the kind of automation that throws innumerable people out of jobs. First of all, new industries should be set up as far as possible away from 10 or 12 or 15 most heavily or thickly populated cities. Secondly, we should ensure that they are pollution free. We should insist on subsidized housing and basic amenities such as medical care and elementary and secondary schools being provided to employees and their families. As far as possible, manpower intensive units rather than ones with heavy automation should be encouraged. Small scale, cottage, medium, and micro industries should be preferred over the heavy industries. They should also make the employer-employee relation more meaningful and more personal, and reduce the possibility of the workers being seen simply as cogs in the wheel as in Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times. What we need is not only to conquer nature, but also to live in harmony with it. We have to save the planet and make lives of billions of people inhabiting it at least moderately decent. I am sure the details of the hapless plight of human beings under uncontrolled, unfeeling, and unimaginative industrialization, as recorded in literature, more intimately and touchingly than in any factual account or document, will go a long way towards sensitizing us to the issues. If we don't learn from them, it's all going to end in the smoke. I thank the organizers for inviting me to the talk, to give a talk, and thank you all for listening to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for this indeed enriching and stimulating session. Questions are welcome from the viewers. You may drop your question in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and we can have an interactive Q&A round. Sir has rightly mentioned the filthiest, the strangest, the most extraordinary of the many localities, a maze of close, narrow and muddy streets devoted to traffic, loathsome indications of filth, rot and garbage, which is as much of a reality today in our times as it was in Dickens's hard times, I believe.
Sinha, sir. I don't have a question, but as you were reading out and mentioning human beings becoming cog in the machine, I just remembered that Adam Smith has mentioned that in order to industrially produce a pin from the raw materials to a packaged box of pin requires 18 different processes, which actually at one level he was underlining the division of labor, but then Marx would take this up and talk about what you have just mentioned, the cog in the machine syndrome, where the industrial workers were becoming skilled in their narrow little one of these processes, but they were also becoming highly mechanized, and it was also affecting their mind. I just remembered this from Adam Smith. This is just a little observation to what you were mentioning. It brought this back to me.
I'll agree with you.
And since you mentioned Wordsworth, Wordsworth's what we know as the Tinten Abbey, which is actually lines composed a few miles above Tinten Abbey. Yes. And very literally so, because when Wordsworth revisited Tinten Abbey, it was 5 years after, that is in 1798. First time he visited in 1793. During these 5 years, 2 log mills had come up at Tinten, and their refuse, industrial refuse, was directly being discharged in the River Wye. So much so that 1 mile stretch of the River Wye, the color of the water had blackened. So Wordsworth's Tinten Abbey was no longer that savvy for a poet of nature to ruminate or contemplate about sitting at the spot of Tinten Abbey. He literally had to move a few miles above Tinten Abbey. This is another important, interesting thing that it comes to my mind. and that is so. If Tinten Abbey 1798, Blake, you mentioned his poem in 1789, another beginning year of the Romantic period. One can see in this echoing green by Blake, when the last line from the echoing green becomes the darkening green, the fading away of the green fields also. I would read that in this manner. I have taken a lot of time, but I would ask others also to make their observations, including in this group, the first student of Professor Sinha, Professor Mehta is also there. We would love to hear from him also.
I do want to mention that the observations were very, very pertinent and very accurate. Blake, of course, was far more critical of the way things were than Wordsworth was. But let others give their opinions.
Yes, sir.
Sir, I would like to add on to what you said about William Blake.
Yes.
There is this poem called London.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Where he says, you know, in every face mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of hope. And he then mentioned the chimney sweeper's cry and the blacking walls of the church.
Yes, I think Blake was a far more radical poet than Wordsworth or Coleridge, no doubt about it.
True.
I think the only romantic who could match him in his social criticism was Shelley. But then Shelley was not as concrete as Blake was.
True.
So Peter Ackroyd, who has written a very famous biography of Eliot,
Yes,
has also written a biography of London. And one chapter exclusively deals with the waste of London, sir. I also remember that.
yeah.
How you know, human excrement and other waste and other refuse were directly poured into Thames, and how gradually things started improving.
Yes.
Over hundreds of years, he goes on to say. But the specific chapter deals with the waste of London and what was being done with it.
Yes. See, I went to the Globe for a seminar, actually more like a workshop in 2008. And then, you know, they sent us for a trip of the city. And the person who, you know, took us on the river said about Thames, it's a very dusty but a very clean river.
Right.
Though dusty, it was clean. And I didn't see any waste then. But we all know very well what Eliot says of, Thames in wasteland.
Correct, sir. Yeah.
The most famous example of the scum, the dirt.
Exactly. Yeah. In wasteland.
Hello, sir. Good evening.
Yes.
Are you able to hear me, sir?
Oh, yes.
Hello.
I can hear you well.
Sir, it was so nice listening to you after a very long time. I have one simple question kind of thing, which would help students, in fact, look at the whole thing in a better way. Sir, all of them are talking about the dirt and everything, foul smell, everything spread by the industrialization. But does any author talk about why this industrialization became so popular? Why people started migrating from villages to the city? And do they, in fact, go into this? And secondly, are they also suggesting some alternative solutions to this? That the people stop coming from the villages, they get employment in the villages itself, and industry also survives, or they are simply representing the ugly, you can say, consequences of industrialization. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Kamal. Your questions are quite perceptive. As we know, one reason for the shift to the city was the enclosure rules. You know, the landlords began enclosing their land, and a lot of tenant farmers were forced to leave. And that we see even in writings about writings about the rural countryside. But I can't think of anyone suggesting a solution. And of course, they'll say it's not for us to give a solution. We are there simply to highlight the problem. But can you think?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
Yeah, that is right, sir.
a solution anywhere? You see, actually, Mrs. Gaskell was in some ways milder than Dickens, partly because she had lived a more sheltered life. See, and then she had to project a Christian view of life and think of love with a capital L as a solution to the problems. So it's so appropriate that I'm discussing her on the 2nd of October, because Mahatma Gandhi also talked about the need for love between the employers and the employees. But as experience has shown us, that hasn't worked in practice. I think
Thank you,
Tata,
sir. Thank you very much.
Tata's did one good
Sir.
thing,
Please.
encouraged the workers to buy shares in the company. So that gave them a certain, shall I say, interest, a certain vested interest in the company succeeding.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
Sir, this is Tapas.
Yes,
Can you hear me, sir?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Sir, you talked about America, you talked about Britain, and then you came to D.H. Lawrence, rightfully so, sir. This is something I observed. We have a writer in France who also criticizes this kind of industrialization and devastation of the rural life, but in someone called Emile Zola. Now, this is something, you know, the British have always spurned Zola because of the swearing, the drinking, the copulation which he shows in his novels. But Zola, sir, here I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that Zola was for some time working as a kind of some kind of a publicity manager in Hachette Book Company, which had published the first translation of Dickens's Bleak House. Although Zola said that he had not read, but the critics doubt that many of the ideas about this kind of critique of the industrial city, industrial waste, Zola might have been inspired by Dickens. That is something which I just wanted to bring to your notice, sir. And second coincidence, which Sanjay talked about, Adam Smith. Incidentally, Adam Smith was also a professor of logic at the University of Manchester, where the great Mills grew up. And this whole group of utilitarianists, Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, they took a lot of ideas from Adam Smith's. And utilitarianism as such got a lot of bad name. But if you look today at utilitarianism, you largely you have a trend which takes us towards what is now known as consequentialism. An action is judged by its consequence, the proponents of which were G.E. Moores. And today, in today's world, we have someone like Peter Singer, one of the greatest ethicists of our time, who is a huge proponent of giving up, Peter Singer. So, Dickens does criticize utilitarianism of the kind which Jeremy Bentham preaches, but when we look at the kind of utilitarianism with consequentialist shades which it has now evolved into, it talks about the maximum benefit of the maximum people without reference to the individual, what is good for everyone. That is the kind of utilitarianism now which we live in, which people like Peter Singer proposes. That is what I wanted to say. And of course, Sanjay talks about this Peter Ackroyd's biography. Sir, also, if you talked about the glove and visiting Ian Mortimer's book, that is time traveling to Elizabethan England. That also talks about how knight's soil was carried from the Queen's Palace, dumped into the Thames, and in the same river, what vegetables would be washed in order to be sold in the market. So, so that's a kind of an observation. I thought I mean, because immediately Zola came to my mind, because Zola, Dickens, Lawrence, and on the other side of the continent you have the American writers. There is a kind of interconnectivity between all these writers. Thank you, sir. That was my observation.
Thank you. I just want to add a couple of things. The first is that the change in utilitarian philosophy began with John Stuart Mill. His autobiography mentions that he saw something wrong with what he was taught, and definitely Mill became, I should say, more humane kind of thinker.
Yes,
than those who came before him, as they say, tried to combine Adam Smith with Coleridge and have some kind of a fusion. You see, in the ashram at Ahmedabad, they have these words of Gandhi: the greatest good of all. He didn't say greatest number. The greatest good of all, which I think is an extension of what was earlier said. Now, Zola was a naturalist, and that naturalism came towards the end of the 19th century, in some ways tied to the domination of different classes. In France, if you observe carefully, in Europe, I should say, the first 30, 40 years were dominated by the upper classes. Then in 1848, there was this big revolution that failed, but that shook up the upper class domination. So the Romantic age gave way to realism, that flourished with authors like Flaubert. And at the end, we have naturalism. And naturalism, in some ways, is the reverse of, or a parallel to, social Darwinism. Once again, the whole emphasis being on environment and heredity, and so on. Ibsen was compared to Zola, but Ibsen said, I'm quoting him, I descend into the sewer to clean it. Zola descends into it to have a bath in it. So I think that's the difference between Ibsen and Zola.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Any question from the students, or I should say the younger people? Of course, we are all young, but some are much younger than the others.
Sir, I should rush to say that you are younger than all of us.
Thank you very much.
I think the scope of your talk, the width of it, would gradually sink in among the budding teachers and scholars that we have here today. And from English through a glimpse of the German to American, and coming down to talk about situations in India. And also in the discussion session, we also had a glimpse of the French scenario. So this has been really a very fruitful session for all of us. I thank you very, very sincerely on behalf of the Alumni Association in the Department of English and Comparative Literary Studies, sir. And all of us would certainly note how a careful, detailed, and meticulous reader Professor Sinha is. This is what we can learn from a senior teacher in our discipline. And of course, when we are more in the age of reading about the text than the text themselves, then of course the distinction or the difference, the vast difference that comes about when actually reading the text. Professor Sinha, we keep on emphasizing in our department about the primariness of the text. And again, this has been brought about so very powerfully in your talk. And finally, of course, literature being such a vivid record of the changing times. This is what we get from your talk. So on behalf of everyone, all the listeners, I thank everyone who has joined. On behalf of the department, its alumni, and all here, I express a deepest sense of gratitude and thank you, Professor Sinha, for your wonderful talk today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sanjay, and thank you all the organizers.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Bye-bye.
Yeah,
And
good
thank you.
night, everyone. Thank you.